As Karen mentioned, her work over several years now with a number of colleagues really started to push the field in thinking among researchers about how we could do a better job of providing information that's actually really going to help schools improve how we understand the ways in which we're serving our students. And so in part, this project that Carrie Parker and I have been working on for the last couple of years started to use that research to start to say, well, if we looked at graduation rates in New York City, how might we see some different patterns by applying this EL framework? And in part, I think for folks, and I saw sort of in the lobby that folks are coming from all across the country, various states, it's always an important question for educators to ask, well, okay, so Karen's got these great data from Oregon that really illustrated very nicely the importance of the EL framework and how it provides different information about how there may be ways in which Oregon schools are serving these students much better than we might expect. But folks from other places might say, well, how much does this apply to where I'm from? And so that was partly motivated our work to say, well, what does this pattern look like in New York City? Because as Karen mentioned, the general notion of the general idea that English learners become reclassified and that it is the students who are succeeding academically become reclassified, and then most students reach that point before high school who were entered earlier, that general idea applies across states, right? That general pattern is true, but the specifics are going to differ in different places, both in terms of the services and the success and effectiveness of those services in helping students who are ever English learners move toward graduation, but also in terms of the actual criteria that different states use to move students from the current English learner to the former English learner category. This is an important topic in New York City, as it is in many places. Just in this past spring, there were the state released graduation rates, and when they did, was actually quite a bit of a point that was picked up by the media that the overall city's graduation rates has continued to climb, but that the graduation rate for English learners actually seems to be going in the other direction, that we have a largest share of English learners dropping out. But when I saw this headline, I was a bit concerned because for the reasons that Karen described, it can be very tricky to measure those correctly. So more recently, there was another article that actually started to pick up on this nuance to say how well are English learners doing in New York City schools? Well, it depends a bit on the stats you consider. And so I'll illustrate that a little bit today. The report, which you can have access to, it's in the today's download, the box that says download today's files. And I believe it'll appear up in chat if it hasn't already. To download this is a report that I worked on again with Carrie Parker. And we focused in this report on the outcomes for students who entered New York City public schools in grade 5 or 6. And so this isn't the entire group of students who are ever English learners. And that's in part for some data reasons, in part because we had some limited information about students who had entered earlier, and because of some changes that had happened many years ago with the introduction of No Child Left Behind, it was difficult to track students who had entered several years earlier. It was also difficult in part because we were interested in looking both at not only at 4-year graduation rates, but also to follow students for several years after that. So we wanted sufficient data to go that far. However, I think as Karen illustrated, this sort of general pattern and the general benefits of using the Every English Learner framework hold up for other groups as well. So our research questions were specifically to look at what percentage of students entered students who entered New York City public schools in these grades as English learners graduated from high school, both on time and, as I mentioned, within 5 or 6 years of entering 9th grade. What type of diplomas were earned by these students, and how do long-term and short-term English learners differ in these graduation rates? And I'm not going to talk about those latter two questions, but if folks are interested, they should refer to the report. The data are from the New York City Department of Education and were compiled and processed by a center called the Research Alliance for New York City Schools that's here at NYU. And that's a research center who is actively collaborating in this process. We focused, as I mentioned, on this cohort of students who had entered as English learners. And this was a group who entered right after the beginning of No Child Left Behind in 2003, 2004. And most of them were expected to graduate in the spring of 2010 or 2011. So these rates are not the most recent. These are not the most recent cohorts of students. but they're expected to graduate in 2010 or 2011, and that we follow them 2 years beyond this, so through the spring of 2012 or 2013. So what we see is that if we look at the on-time graduation rate, that 4-year graduation rate, ever English learners in New York City are doing a little bit worse. About 64% are graduating on time compared to the system-wide rate of 71%. However, that's a much higher rate, or tells a much different story than what's typically reported. So when we look at the city's estimates for the relevant cohort years, for the relevant expected graduation years, we see about 46% of current English learners, meaning current English learners when they enter 9th grade, we see about 46% of them graduating. And so this illustrates very much that the pattern that Karen identified in Oregon holds up as well in the New York City data, and suggests that when we focus exclusively on that current English learner graduation rate, we're missing out on quite a bit of the success stories of what's happening. Then when we extend out to look at graduation further along, and this is something that often when I talk to educators who work with English learners at the high school level tell me that it's really important to think not just about 4 years of graduation, but how many students graduate after 5 years or 6 years. And we, in fact, do see quite a striking pattern here where although the ever English learner graduation, 4-year graduation rate is lower than the system-wide average, that's the green bars being the ever English learners, by the 6-year rate, 6 years out, we actually see that those rates have reached the same level as the system-wide rate. So this suggests that we're also getting a piece of information by looking a few years out. This has informed decisions by New York State and other places to think about a 6-year graduation rate as a really important indicator. Doesn't mean that you don't also want to keep track of your 4-year graduation rates, but it suggests that we are seeing some important information. We're seeing some important successes and maybe some places that are struggling more by looking at the 6-year graduation rate as well.